So now we'll go through the next set here. So we saw how to add an attribute, set an attribute, remove an attribute, all right? And we saw how to create a text node, how to remove an element. And then we can take a look at class list. So if we go to class list here, all right, the HTML DOM class list. So add a myStyle class to an element. So in this case, we have the class list property, which returns the CSS class names of an element, right? And here we're adding myStyle. So yeah, click add here. It adds the style to this div. So when we click this function, my function, what this is going to do is it's going to call the method here, which is going to call the document.getElementById from my div, and then it gets my div here, and then it goes to the class style and it adds the style myStyle. Okay. Now we can go to remove. So we can go back to this example. Instead of having remove, it'll remove it. And we can go to toggle. Nothing happens. We can go to add. Since we removed it, I have to refresh and rerun this. So we can do toggle. We want to toggle myStyle on the myDiv element. So we want to toggle myStyle. You can add it. All right. So you can just go ahead and grab this code, go to Visual Studio Code, we'll create a new file, and we'll call it class list module.html. And we'll save this, and then we'll reveal in Finder. Click on this, click add. Okay. We can go back here, we can modify this, we can change it from add to toggle. Okay. And here we'll do toggle. Save it, refresh, add, and this is a way for us to toggle, and we can change this to toggle. This is a way for us to toggle the class on the HTML. All right. Now we can continue to go through these topics here. So we have text content. So the text content property sets or returns the text content of the specified node and all its descendants. When you set the text content property, all child nodes are removed and replaced by only one new text node. You can go to an example. Okay. So in this case, we have the document object.getElementById myButton.textContent, and then we're changing the text content of the button, right? So let's try it. We can try and make this into something else. Change this to my button. So this is a way for us to update the text content here. What we want to do is we want to try and get the text content from an element. So why don't we try and create another element here. I'll take this, we'll go over to Visual Studio Code. We'll create a new file. And we'll call this text content module .html. And we'll save this, and what we'll do is we'll add a p tag here, and we'll call this id equals my new paragraph. And here we'll go ahead and, instead of using my button, we'll do my new paragraph. And we'll save that. Review in Finder. So we want to change this to the paragraph content. Paragraph content. Is paragraph content. So you just do save it. This is a way for us to get the text content from the HTML element. Alright, we can look at inner HTML. So the inner HTML, we can get the HTML content of an element with the ID of my paragraph. So the inner HTML property of this is my paragraph. Alright, here we have our paragraph, and here we're getting the inner HTML. So we can grab this and go back here and make a new module. We'll call it inner HTML module.html. We'll save it, and we go ahead and add another paragraph here. Okay, so what I've done is I turned this into my p2, so I'm getting the element by its ID, my p2, inner HTML, and then here I'm setting the inner HTML to the value from the inner HTML here. Okay, so I can go back here, and then we will go to our module here, and we'll go to Reveal in Finder. Open this up. So this is the content from the second paragraph. The content of my paragraph is my P2 is, this is the content from the second paragraph. Okay, now I'll go to the outer HTML. So the outer HTML property sets or returns the HTML element, including attributes start tag and end tag. So we go ahead and try this. The outer HTML property is here, right? And here we have the H2 we're trying to use, right? So this is the outer HTML property. What we want to do is change the outer HTML to this H3, you changed me and my content. Alright, so click change, right? You changed me and my content. that updates the outer HTML in this H2. We can go ahead and make this into an H1 and run this. And so this changes the outer HTML for the H1. Can change this to a paragraph tag and run. And this changes the outer HTML of the paragraph tag. So we get the element by its tag name, and then we set the outer HTML to the value in this string. Right? Okay, now I can look at that value. So here we have the value property, which sets or returns the value of an attribute. Right? So here we get the value of the first attribute. Go ahead and run this. So here we have the HTML for this demonstration, right? And then we get the elements of document.getElement by ID demo. And then we want to let the value be equal to the element.attributes 0.value. Right? So now we do document.getElement by ID demo .inner HTML instead of equal to value. Right, so if we run that, this is supposed to do is it's supposed to take the value from the element with the ID demo. So this is demo, and then we're getting the attributes value here. We're setting it here in the demo of a paragraph tag. So we could change this to my ID. And we can run this. So change this back to demo. And back to my ID. And then we'll change this back to my ID. Change this back to my ID.
Does that work like an index where if you had more than one attribute, you could say like you had an ID and a class, and you did attributes 1 where it would pick the second attribute that's listed?
Yep, can change that to my class. Works. Okay. So now we can look at dot style. So here we have a style object, right? And what the style object wants us to do is set the border, set the background, set the border image, set the border radius, the border style. All these things can be set using the style object. Okay? Alright, now we're going to get into JavaScript events. Alright, so what are JavaScript events? Can someone give me an analogy for what an event is in general in programming? What do you think of when you hear an event?
The things that happen to the HTML elements.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, so like a button would be an event.
Like a click on a page, right? That's an event. Mouse over, that's an event. Anything that we kind of looked at with JavaScript where we're doing some sort of interaction with the page, that's an event, right? So JavaScript events are things that happen to HTML elements. When JavaScript is used in HTML pages, JavaScript can react on these events. An HTML event can be something the browser does or something a user does. Here are some examples of HTML events. An HTML web page has finished loading. An HTML input field was changed. An HTML button was clicked. Often when events happen, you may want to do something. JavaScript lets you code which events are detected. HTML allows event handler attributes with JavaScript code to be added to HTML elements. So with single quotes, here's an event, some JavaScript, and then with double quotes, here's an event, some JavaScript. So in this example, we have a button here, right? And then on click, we have document.getElementById demo.innerHTML date. So this is, essentially setting the date based on click, right? We can go ahead and run this example. So the time is, right? We can click this and we can get the date. So we can go here and we can add a new module. And we'll call it the JavaScript Events module. Save it. And let's see, what sort of things can we get off of date? So the JavaScript date object. Right, we have a JavaScript date object, and we can go here. We can look at date.now, date.utc, date.prototype.getFullYear. Do date.now. Save it, and then we can go back to our page here. So reveal in Finder, and then click open. The time is, open up console. Okay, so date.now is not a function. So date.now returns any numeric value according to the time. So go back to our code, and we'll change this to date.now. And we'll go ahead and rerun this. So the date.now method, the static date.now method returns the number of milliseconds elapsed since January 1st, 1970. It's a way for us to record time. And that's a JavaScript event that we can use. We also have what's referred to as an event listener. So this event listener takes in an event, and then it takes a callback, the function to be processed. So if we bring this back here, all right. Here is an event on click, and when we want to use a callback, all we have to do is specify the onClick event, and then we have to pass in a function to basically do that. So if we go back to our module here, we can take this example, which is on click. We can add a new module here, new file, and we'll call it event listener module.html, and then we'll add our script tag, and then we'll do a function main. And here we'll do document.getElementById demo.add event listener, and the function will take onClick as the event, and then we'll have a function. We'll go back here to the actual syntax. So we have our event here on click, and we'll pass in a function try mouse event. And we'll pass a function. And then in this function we'll do get rid of this. And then we want to make sure that main gets called. So we'll have main, and we'll save that and include this extra script tag. Okay, so we want to add an event listener.
And there's a typo in the button, in the button tag.
Okay, and we'll save that, and then we'll go to Reveal in Finder. And we'll just open the console and see if issues. So I want to make sure that this is connected, so we'll just do a quick console.log. Alright. So here we can see an example where we have the method being passed in, and then we have our function, and then we have an event being passed in here. We go back to our code here. We make this into a string. Save that. So the syntax is use a function, and then that function gets an event. Right, so we have to have that event listener in here. So go back to our code. So we'll put this ID on the button, save it, click this, to make sure this is actually working here. So demo, and then we'll change this to just click. And there we go. Guess we just set the time on that button. We can change this to be the button, and we'll change this to be the button. And then we'll change this to be ID equals demo. And we'll save that. And then we'll rerun it. And here we'll do a document .get element by ID demo, and we'll make this into our paragraph. And then we'll do paragraph inner HTML and set that to date now. There we go. That's great for us to keep track of the time. Okay. So let's take a look at the event object here. So the event object, all event objects in the DOM are based on the event object. Therefore, all event objects like mouse event and keyboard event has access to the event object's properties and methods. Right, so some of the methods that can be accessed here are bubbles, cancel bubble, cancelable, composed, create event, compose path, current tag, default prevented, event phase, is trusted, prevent default, stop immediate propagation, stop propagation, target, timestamp, and type. This is the way that we can use the event object. Right? We also have the event.prevent default. So this is a way for us to prevent an event from executing. Go ahead and close these here. So we have event.prevent default, right? So prevent default method of the event interface tells the user agent that if the event does not get explicitly handled, its default action should not be taken as normally would be. The event continues to propagate as usual unless one of its event listeners calls stop propagation or stop immediate propagation, either of which terminates propagation at once. So, as noted below, calling prevent default for a non-cancelable event, such as one dispatch via event target.dispatch event without specifying cancelable true, has no effect. So here is prevent default, right? So in this example, we have a function that's taking an event, and then it's processing a click event, and then it checks to see how to process the event here, and it has document.getElement by ID, output box, set the inner HTML to sorry, prevent code default won't let you check this. Right? Then we have passing a name function versus an anonymous function. So a name function, right? So we've been seeing this, what we're used to. An anonymous function is the callback that you're passing into the event listener, right? And the event that we're looking at is the object target property. That's the thing that we're trying to target here. It's the event.target. We have the concept of mouse events. We just saw click, there's double click, there's mouse down. Those are mouse events. So the mouse event interface represents events that occur due to the user interacting with a pointing device such as a mouse. Common events using this interface include click, double click, mouse up, mouse down. Mouse event derives from a UI event, which in turn derives from event. Though the mouse event.init mouse event method is kept for backward compatibility, creating a mouse event object should be done using the mouse event constructor. Okay, so here we have the mouse event that gets bubbled up to a UI event that gets bubbled up to an event. That's how that works. We have a mouse event here, right? And this creates the actual event. Here's some of the properties. We have mouse event.altKey, mouse event.button, mouse event.buttons, and then mouse event.clientX. Okay, so these are some of the properties that we have available on here. So here's some more mouse events, right? We have mouse up, mouse enter, mouse leave, mouse over, mouse out, mouse move. We go to mouse up. So the mouse up event. The mouse up event is fired at an element when a button on a pointing device, such as a mouse or trackpad, is released while the pointer is located inside it. Mouse up events are the counterpoint to mouse down events. Alright? So a mouse up event is the inverse of a mouse down event. The mouse enter event is fired at an element when a pointing device, usually a mouse, is initially moved so that its hotspot is within the element at which the event was fired. The mouse leave event is fired at an element when the cursor of a pointing device, usually a mouse, is moved out of it. Mouse leave and mouse out are similar, but differ in that mouse leave does not bubble and mouse out does. This means that mouse leave is fired when the pointer has exited the element and all of its descendants, whereas mouse out is fired when the pointer leaves the element or leaves one of the element's descendants, if the pointer is still within the element. So here's the behavior of mouse leave events, right? Here's an event is sent, an event is sent, an event is sent, right? So a mouse leave event is sent to each element of the hierarchy when leaving them. So this shows 4 events that are sent to the 4 elements of the hierarchy when the pointer moves from the text to an area outside of the most outer div represented here. So here's the behavior of the mouse out events, right? So the mouse out is sent and it bubbles up the hierarchy until it is canceled or reaches root. And now we have the mouse over event. So the mouse over event is fired at an element in a pointing device, such as a mouse or trackpad is used to move the cursor onto the element or one of its child elements. Here are some examples. The following example illustrates the difference between mouse over and mouse enter events. Here we have our HTML, right? And here we have our example. So in this case, mouse enter event event occurs, and then the function passes the event here, and then we call event.target.style.color, right? And this sets the color to purple. And then there's a timeout function here, so we're setting the timeout function to change the target's color to blank after 500 milliseconds. And then we have another event listener here for a mouse over, and this mouse over will check to change the style to orange. And then again, another timeout occurs and it will reset it back to the original color, right? So this is a way for us to create sort of interactive HTML here. Right. Go ahead and take this and we can make a module out of this. So we'll go ahead and go to Visual Studio Code, and we'll create a new file, and we'll call this mouse events module.html, and we'll go ahead and type in HTML boilerplate, and then we'll have mouse events, and then we need to add our script. So our script is going to be the following code here. So we want to add these 2 methods. So let test equal document.getElement by ID test, right? That's one. Tab this over. And then we have another one here. And tab this over. So here are our 2 events, mouse enter and mouse over. Alright, now we'll go back here and we'll take the HTML that we need. So this UL ID test. Right, and we'll go ahead and put this in our body. Can save that, reveal in Finder. So we can change these to different colors, right? This is purple and orange. We can go here and we can change this to blue and green and save it. So this allows us to mouse enter and mouse over. Right, so when the mouse enters, it's going to change the color to blue, and when we mouse over, it's going to change it to green. Okay. Now I have mouse out. So the mouse out event is fired at an element when a pointing device, usually a mouse, is used to move the cursor so that it is, yep, so we went through this, right? Yep, we can just go through and this is the same sort of concept, right? what we have here is when the mouse leaves, it's going to change the color. So we just saw an example where we were doing the mouse over and mouse enter. So what we can do is we can take this code here and we can create our own example. This is different, right? It's using mouse leave, so nothing happens when you actually initially mouse in. It's when you leave the element. So we can go ahead and grab the code here, and we'll create a new file, and we'll call this mouse leave events.html, and we'll create our HTML here, and we'll call this mouse leave events, and we'll add our script tag here. The JavaScript that we need for this is the following. So go ahead and tab this in. So we have an event listener here that we're setting on the test element. So we're going document.getElement by ID test, and then we're setting the event listener on test. And once we do that, this will allow us to change the color on that event. All right. Now we can go here and we can change the color to orange. We mouse out, so when we leave, it'll change it to purple, and when we mouse out, it'll change it to orange. So we can go ahead and change this to blue. And green. And then right-click here, Reveal in Finder, and then open this up in our browser. We'll add our ULs. So enter and leave, and the key here is we want to make sure this is connected. So we have our script tag. Go ahead and take this, move this out. And we don't need the source because it's being included directly in the file. We have our element test. Save that. Refresh this. So here's the ID test that we're going to get, and then mouse leave. Right, we want to make sure that when we leave, this is actually going to, set the color to blue. And when we mouse out, it should set it to green. So let's check our curly braces. Yep, that works. Check curly braces. Yep, that works. Okay, so go ahead and we'll just put a console.log to make sure this is connected. And we'll save this, and then we'll go back. And we'll refresh it. So it's connected. And there we go. So when you leave, the elements change colors. Now we can look at mouse move. So the mouse move event is fired at an element when pointing a device, usually a mouse, is moved while the cursor's hotspot is inside of it. So here are some examples. The following examples use the mouse down, mouse move, and mouse up events to allow the user to draw on an HTML5 canvas. Its functionality is simple. The thickness of the line is set to 1 and the color is always black. When the page loads, constants myPix and context are created to store a reference to the canvas and the 2D context we will use to draw. So drawing begins when the mouse down event fires. We will first store the X and Y coordinates of the mouse pointer in the variables X and Y, and then set is drawing to true. As the mouse moves over the page, the mouse move event fires. If is drawing is true, the event handler calls the drawLine function to draw a line from the stored X and Y values to the current location. When the drawLine function returns, we adjust the coordinates and then save them in X and Y. So the mouse up event draws the final line segment, sets X and Y to 0, and stops further drawing by setting is drawing to false. So here's our HTML that we need. It's this canvas, and then here is the CSS that we'll need. This is a canvas that has a width of 560 and a height of 360. And then we have our JavaScript here. Right, so the result will allow us to draw content on the canvas here. So you can go ahead and create a module, create a new file, and we'll call this drawing module.html, and we'll add our boilerplate HTML, and we'll call this drawing module, and then we'll add a script, and we'll go ahead and put our canvas in here, and then we'll add a style here. And we'll add the canvas. And we'll add our JavaScript. So, yeah, this is a method here called mouse move, right? So what this does is it goes through and it will check to see if the mouse has been moved, and if it has, it will allow us to start drawing. So let's go to the code here. We'll break this, make this a little bit smaller so we can actually see all the methods here. So we have our function drawLine, tab that in. And then we have add event listener, we'll tab that in. And we have the myPix add event listener. Tab this in. Okay. And then we'll tab this one in. Alright, so what this does is it sets the X and Y, and then it gets the element myPix, which is this canvas here, and then it gets the 2D context from the myPix canvas. And then we add an event listener to check for the mouse down. If that's the case, then we set the X value to the event target's offset, Y and the X, just because it's our coordinates. And then when we have mouse move, if isDrawing is true, then we draw the line using that context, using X and Y and the offsets. And then once mouse is up, we check to see if drawing is true. If that's the case, then we'll add the draw line, we'll set X and Y back to 0, and then we'll set isDrawing to false. So mouse up sets the drawing to false, right? And we have mouse down. This is the part where we set isDrawing to true. And then we have draw line. And this is where we begin the path. We set the stroke style to black. We can change this to something like green. We can save that, and then we can reveal this in Finder. Open this up. This will allow us to draw on the canvas. Right. Refresh. There we go. So that's a way that we can start drawing the line.
So that begin path, that's a method built into JavaScript that's not defined in the program.
This is coming off of context, which is the context 2D, which is associated with a canvas element. So this is one of the HTML5 special features to canvas. A canvas has a property called getContext, and you can get the 2D context off of the canvas to do that, so it's unique to canvas.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
Yep. Here we go. Okay. So continuing, we have JavaScript events again, right? We have submit, key down, key up, key press, focus, blur, and cut. So if we go to submit, so the HTML form element submit event. The submit event fires when a form is submitted. Note that the submit event fires on the form element itself and not on any button or input type submit inside it. However, the submit event, which is sent to indicate the form's submit action has been triggered, includes a submitter property, which is the button that was invoked to trigger the submit request. The submit event fires when the user clicks a submit button or input type submit button, right? So this is just a way for us to check that a submit event has occurred. Here are a few examples. We have an HTML form here, and then when we click on the button submit, this will submit the form, and when that happens, you can see that it's going to log the submit here, and it'll say log.textContent, form has been submitted. This is how this works, right? We have a form here, we have a log, and then we add an event listener for log submit on that submit button. So we can test this. So create a module here, we'll go. And in here we'll add our JavaScript. Okay, we can reveal in Finder. So this says the form was submitted and prints out the timestamp. So the timestamp comes from the event.timestamp. All right, and yeah. Then we have key down. So key down event here. The key down event is fired when a key is pressed. Unlike the key press event, the key down event is fired for all keys, regardless of whether they produce a character value. The key down and key up event provides a code indicating which key is pressed, while key press indicates which character was entered. For example, a lowercase a will be reported as 65 by key down and key up, but as 97 by key press. An uppercase A is reported as 65 by all events. Alright, so in this example, we can log a key event code. Right? Here we will take the HTML, right, and we'll add a document getElementById to select the element with the ID log, and then we'll add an event listener for the key down, and then we'll log the key. Right, so this key down is the event that we're looking at, and then log key is what actually causes the JavaScript to fire, right? So focus on the iframe first by clicking on it, then pressing some keys. So you're pressing the keys, right? Yep. Then we have key up. So the key up event is fired when a key is released. The key down and key up events provide a coding indicating which key is pressed, while key press indicates which character was entered. For example, a lowercase a will be reported as 65 by key down and key up, but as 97 by key press. An uppercase a is reported as 65 by all events. Here's some examples. Right, so this example logs the keyboard event code whenever you release a key. So focus on the iframe here, right, and then same sort of thing. It's on the key up event, right? So we saw key down, and this is on key up. And we have the focus event. The focus event fires when an element has received focus. The main difference between this event and focus in is that focus in bubbles while focus does not. It's the opposite of focus is blur. So here's a simple example. We have a form with an ID, right? And here's an input for that form and another input. This takes a text input and a password. And we're looking at focus, this event here. And when we focus, it'll turn the background pink. Right? It's one way to draw the user's attention to the form. Then we have blur. So the blur event fires when an element has lost focus. The main difference between this event and focus out is that focus out bubbles while blur does not. The opposite of blur is focus. Right? So here's a simple example. Again, we have a form with a text and a password. So here we have the focus event, which will be pink, right? And then blur, it'll change the background to nothing. So this is a way for us to change background back to nothing after we've left the text input. Okay, now we have cut. So the cut event is fired when the user has initiated a cut action through the browser's user interface. If the user attempts a cut action on uneditable content, the cut event still fires, but the event object contains no data. The event's default action is to copy the current selection, if any, to the system clipboard and remove it from the document. A handler for this event can modify the clipboard contents by calling setData, format data, on the event's clipboard event.clipboardData. So here's an example. We have the div with a class source and content editable true, right? And then we can try cutting the text from this text box. So we can go in here and we have the cut event const selection document.get selection, and then we have event.clipboarddata.setData text plain. So we can press Command X here, and there we go. That's a way for us to cut and copy the text. Okay. All right. There's even more events, right? There's the paste event. So the paste event is fired when the user has initiated paste action through the browser's user interface. If the cursor is in editable context, for example, in a text area or element with content editable attribute set to true, then the default action is to insert the contents of the clipboard into the document at the cursor position. A handler for this event can access the clipboard contents by calling getData on the event's clipboard data property. So we have an example here. Here's our HTML with source, target, right? We're going to try and copy text from this box and paste it into this one. So try copying the text from this box and pasting it into this one. So here we have our div.target, and when we have paste, we're going to call this event. So we're going to copy the code from here, and then we're going to paste it into here. So after we do that, what this does is it will take the copied text that's been pasted in and turn it into uppercase. And then we have change. So a change event is fired for input, select, and text area elements when alteration to an element's value is committed by the user. Unlike the input event, the change event is not necessarily fired for each alteration to an element's value. Depending on the kind of element being changed and the way the user interacts with the element, the change event fires at a different moment. So here's an example. Choose an ice cream flavor, select one. We have chocolate, sardine, vanilla, and here we have our JavaScript code. So we can select an element, right? This query selector, .ice cream class, right? We can select chocolate. So this is you like chocolate, right? So anytime this changes, what will happen is we'll change the text on result. So this will change the text on result. Okay. This will be our stopping point for this evening, and we'll follow up on event bubbling.